Today we look at one of the scariest pieces of classical music ever written. Ooh. Happy Halloween, everyone! Today is the day when countless people embrace the scarier things of life. Everywhere from haunted houses, to horror movies, to knocking on strangers' doors. And in the spirit of the season, I'd like to take some time to talk about one of my biggest childhood fears. It all goes back to when I was a little boy watching Disney's Fantasia, enjoying myself, until the very last animation came up. Modest Mussorgsky's Night on Bald Mountain. Full disclosure, thanks to Mr. Disney and this arrangement by Leopold Stokowski, I was legitimately uncomfortable listening to this piece until I was a freshman in college. Now, the history behind this piece is a mix of tragedy, some legitimate creepiness, and in a surprise twist, a very touching and tender tribute between friends. Modest Mussorgsky was one of the Mighty Handful, or the Russian Five, a group of 5 composers who were dedicated to distancing themselves from the influences of Western music in order to create a unique and authentic Russian sound. They were led by Mily Balakirev, who was also their teacher and who was known for encouraging other Russian composers such as Pyotr Tchaikovsky. Now, Mussorgsky, along with fellow members of the 5, Cui and Borodin, was not a professional musician. He was a soldier by profession who had a working knowledge of music and a passion for making it. A lot of the music he wrote took its inspiration from Russian literature and folklore, and Night on Bald Mountain is a prime example. It's based on the legends surrounding an actual mountain in Ukraine that's the traditional gathering place of witches and the like, as well as a short story by Russian author Nikolai Gogol, St. John's Eve. I put a link in the description if you want to read it, but be warned, it gets pretty dark. Modest wrote his original draft of Night on Bald Mountain in 1867 after having planning to write it for something like 9 years. And when he finished, he presented it to his teacher, Mily Balakirev. And Mily didn't like it. His handwritten notes in that score keep saying things like, absolute rubbish. This does sound like the devil, but in the bad way. Oh, okay, that part's pretty good. So let's take a look at this. What made Mily hate this piece so much? This really tore Mussorgsky up. He'd been wanting to write this piece for 10 years, only to have his teacher just basically tear it to shreds. Now, as Mussorgsky matured, he really was a very fine composer. I mean, have you heard Pictures at an Exhibition in the original piano version? But here in one of his earlier works, he is showing traits that are common to emerging composers. He was only 28 when he wrote this. One of those traits was a lot of starts and stops. Now don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with good dramatic pauses. In fact, in this original version and in Rimsky-Korsakov's later version, they both have the same amount of pauses, both when they're notated with fermatas or just with rests. But the difference lies in how they're approached. With Mussorgsky in this piece, it sounded like he wasn't quite sure how to round up an idea or how to build it up to the next theme, and so he just kind of pulled the emergency brake. Development of an idea takes a lot of time to learn, and really Mussorgsky was showing an awful lot of promise in this piece. But he struggled with smoothing it out into one cohesive picture. It often sounds off balance or uneven. Now, it could be argued that that's what he was going after. I mean, this piece is about a witch's Sabbath. But personally, I think it was a classic case of a student still learning and growing, still not quite able to grasp how to segue from idea to idea. Now, speaking of ideas, I counted at least 8 distinct themes or motifs in the original score. Most of them are heard roughly 3 or 4 times. This one, however, whether in its entirety or just in segments, comes back at least 18 times. What this does to a piece like this is it makes it much more akin to a theme in variations rather than to a symphonic tone poem, which is what Mussorgsky originally described it as. And really, it's not just the sheer number of times this theme occurs, it's how he develops it. Many of them are given unique harmonies to accompany them, and some of them he even switches from minor to major and drastically changes the style in which they're played. For example, my favorite variation comes in at 18 bars past rehearsal marker 18. that just sound so Russian? But perhaps the biggest weakness that Balakirev criticized was Mussorgsky's orchestrations. Contrary to what is commonly done, Mussorgsky didn't first write out the piece in a condensed piano form and then orchestrate it later. Instead, he just pulled out the full manuscript paper and went straight to orchestra. It starts off just fine, very demonic and bombastic, with the timpani wailing out that classical. But when we get to bar 12, we encounter a major problem. So look here at the score. We have flutes, oboes, and 2 cornets all on the exact same note displaced by an octave, and at triple forte. Just beneath them are 2 trumpets blaring out their notes on a double forte. Now that's a lot of sound, and very piercing sound at that. With this scoring, you could have the entire rest of the orchestra playing out as loud as they can, and you could still hear this just fine. But it's not the melody, it's not what the audience wants to focus on. That comes in at bar 14 with the trombones and tuba playing what we know as the Nine on Bald Mountain theme. These other bits in the high brass and high woodwinds is just supporting material. And supporting material like this, A, should not be doubled up so much. B, shouldn't be doubled up in unison with such loud instruments, in this case 2 cornets. C, should not be in triple forte, especially when it's in said unison. Now for contrast, let's see how Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov, who was one of the greatest orchestrators out there, did it in his version. First, notice how it's only the softer instruments who have the accompanying figure. The clarinets are higher in the range, which provides a little bite to it, but it's really only the first clarinet by itself that's providing it. Even the strings are split within their sections, which dampens the volume. This allows the individual performers to play at a forte or fortissimo dynamic without overpowering anything. And even still, Nikolai's not taking any chances. He is going to make sure that melody is heard. He assigns all 3 trombones and the tuba, just like in the original, but he also throws in bassoons, violas, cellos, and basses. The original version of Nine on Bald Mountain is chock full of examples of someone who doesn't quite yet grasp how instruments interact with each other. Mussorgsky forfeits deeper thematic development in favor of just loads of scales running up and down, over and over again. There are some genuinely great moments, such as 4 bars before rehearsal 6. It's a great building up progression. But even then, because of a lone piccolo screeching out by itself, it sacrifices some of the magic. And the end comes unexpectedly, with only the high strings and high woodwinds, and again they're in unison, along with the 2 trumpets and a bass drum just barely mumbling underneath it, and then a single pizzicato note from the cellos and basses. It leaves a feeling of a very anticlimactic letdown and a feeling of, oh, is it over? Now, I want to be clear. All of these criticisms that I'm giving, as well as any that Balakirev might have made, does not mean that Mussorgsky was a bad composer. It doesn't mean that he should have quit music or that his music wasn't worth anything.
Mussorgsky was an excellent composer, but at this point in his career, he was simply a young one and had lots of room to grow and improve.
And improve he did. True to his hardiness both as a soldier and as a Russian, he just kept at it. He revised and revisited this piece several times during his life. First, he tried to put it into an opera ballet Mlada. Now, this is not to be confused with the Mlada that Rimsky-Korsakov did many years later. The movement would have been entitled Glorification of Chernobog, but alas, it never enjoyed any performances, and the score is completely lost to us today. But he did work it into another opera, the Sorochintsi Fair, with libretto also based off of Gogol. It follows a young peasant lad who, in order to marry the girl of his dreams, makes a deal with a gypsy, who is probably not but definitely is in league with the devil. The opera didn't premiere until 1931, 50 years after Mussorgsky died. This version for opera shares a lot of similarities with Mussorgsky's original, but it also has a couple of major differences. Most notably, and most obviously, the inclusion of a chorus. So in this scene, the peasant boy, who's already done his deal with the gypsy, falls asleep and enters into a dream where he's surrounded by demons and they're like dancing and singing away. They're chanting words like Sagadab, Hemot, Ashtaroth, Axaphat, and Allegremos. Now all these words and names are meant to tell the audience that these guys are really from the bad side of the other world, and each one carries with it a connotation of heathenism, or at least in the eyes of the predominantly Eastern Orthodox Church. Pretty much everything that wasn't Orthodox was heathen to them. But for all its creepiness, this scene is actually very lighthearted. In fact, it's kind of silly. A lot of the words used do sound quite diabolical to us, which in all fairness is pretty much how all of Russian sounds. It's kind of like a Slavic version of bibbidi bobbidi boo.
Put them together, and what have you got? Bibbidi bobbidi boo.
So even with the chanting of these heathen names, it's done in such a way that the audience knows that there's really nothing to worry about. It's a lot like that scene in Prince of Egypt where Martin Short and Steve Martin are naming off all the Egyptian gods.
Hemsut, Tafnut, Hep, Mafdet, Ra, Mut, Nut, Pata, Hemsut, Tafnut, Solka.
Creepy, but not really.
They love it.
I mean, even when Chernobog enters, and he's essentially the devil himself, he's just complaining about how hot and stuffy it was back there and how great it is to get a breath of fresh air. Now, also included in this version are a couple of themes not found in the original, but that Rimsky-Korsakov would use in his arrangement. First up, this little trumpet flourish. And the other one is very small. I mean, it's almost just a ditty, but it's a very important one. Rimsky-Korsakov developed the stuffing out of that little bit, but not in the way that Mussorgsky did of that theme, but rather he took every opportunity to sneak it in any chance he got. This made a very effective glue, tying the whole piece together into one cohesive picture. But it's the very end of Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov's version that really caught my attention. After 8 or 9 minutes of witches' Sabbath and pagan festivals, bells chimed to signal the coming dawn, just as it did in the opera version. But it's what comes after that makes this a surprisingly tender piece. Night on Bald Mountain obviously meant a great deal to Modest Mussorgsky. He worked on it for more or less his entire life and sadly never got to hear it before he passed away in 1881. He died a very bitter and angry man. He was upset that his friends in the Mighty Handful had all broken off. He felt betrayed by some of them. He became a raging alcoholic and his health rapidly declined in the last few months of his life. It was 5 years after he passed away that the world was finally introduced to this lifelong endeavor of his through the talents of his friend Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov. And as the piece ends, we hear what we would have first heard as the peasant lad from Sorochintsi Fair falls asleep. To me, it's as if Nikolai was paying one last tribute to his friend after he had fallen asleep, promising to show the world just how great a composer Modest Mussorgsky really was. Thank you all so much for watching, and happy Halloween! Make sure it's fun and safe for everyone out there. Which version of Night on Bald Mountain is your favorite? Personally, I'm partial to the Rimsky-Korsakov, but I've really been falling in love with the Sorochintsi Fair version. Leave a comment down below to start the conversation. A very special thank you to my friend Ray Olson for helping out with the Russian translations. I've collaborated with him on several different projects before, and it's so great to keep working with him. If you enjoy these videos and want to help more of them come to life, then consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Link down in the description. I post a lot of things on that page that I wasn't able to work into these videos but are still very interesting. Or sometimes they're just kind of silly, you know? There's also a load of great perks waiting for everyone who pledges to become a patron. Happy listening!
Click on my little baby head to subscribe. For more episodes like this one, click on the video to the left, and click on the video to the right to go to my other channel where I post my original music. And happy listening.